Before we get into today's episode, I want to share something that's helped transform my daily routine. I've started using Bob, the refillable bottle-free body wash designed specifically for men. If you're still using bottled shower gel, you're literally washing money down the drain. Let's face it, you always use more than you need, and half of it just slips through your hands before it touches your skin. Bob combines a reusable applicator with exfoliating bristles and the world's first refillable body wash bars, formulated to match a man's skin pH of 5.5. All this means you get a deep clean with zero wastage. It's better for your skin, better for your wallet, and better for the planet. For an exclusive 15% offer on your first order, head over to welcometobob.com and use the code meaningofmen15 at checkout. Welcome back to The Meaning of Men, the show dedicated to helping men find meaning, purpose, and resilience in their lives. I'm your host, Simeon Atkins, and today we're exploring how men can build stronger and happier romantic relationships. I'm joined by Kristal DeSantis, a marriage and family therapist and author of Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. We talk about the unspoken pressures men face in relationships, why many feel unequipped for emotional intimacy, and how to start building new relational skills from the ground up. Kristal unpacks her Strong model, a practical tool that gives men a framework to communicate better, self-regulate in conflict, and create meaningful connection. Let's get into it. Kristal, what is the primary mission in the work that you do? And I suppose leading on from that question, what would you like people to take away from our conversation today?
Mission of the work I do is kind of the intersection between intimacy and identity, which is maybe a large concept. So what I would want people to take away from our conversation today are just maybe some practical skills and tools of how they can inhabit their own intersection of those two things in a way that works for them.
Tell us a little bit more about who you are, what your background is, and the journey that's led you on the path to doing what you're doing today.
Sure. So let's see, if we go all the way back, I grew up in a home that was very traditional. So my dad was the breadwinner, my mom was the stay-at-home parent. We had a lot of kids and big family, and it's just a very kind of classic, traditional looking upbringing. And then when I decided to go to college, I actually moved countries. So I grew up in Asia and I moved to the US to go to college because my dad is American. And once I was in college, I realized, the dynamics between people are very different in this culture than they were in the culture I was raised in, especially when it came to dating. American dating culture, Western dating culture is very different than Eastern dating culture. And so I was a real fish out of water. I was fascinated by it, but I was also very intimidated by it. So I just really didn't date at all. And then my younger sister got married, and I started, getting the questions of like, well, what's going on with you, right? I'm the older sister. How come you haven't had a boyfriend yet? And so I was like, shoot, well, I don't know why. I guess I just haven't really put myself out there. But I didn't know how. Right. And so that was kind of, again, this question for me of like, I do want to have a relationship, but I don't want it to go badly. So I guess I just won't do anything. But then of course, online dating, and my friend made a profile for me. I ended up matching with the man who is now my husband. And I realized, I really like him. So I should probably do some work to try to keep him. So I went to therapy because I just didn't know where to go. And I found a marriage and family therapist who was amazing and helped me kind of understand myself, understand my relationship needs, and, help me work on communication skills and all of that. And after a while, I was like, this is really cool. I would like to do this for other people. And that's how I ended up becoming a marriage and family therapist myself.
It's interesting you were saying there about going to therapy, and it was something that you did before there was issues in the relationship. You identified that you wanted to have a healthy and happy relationship. And I think sometimes when people think about therapy, it's something that you do when there's an issue. Whereas obviously how you were seeing it there is something that you could do to help build up a stronger relationship at the start, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, kind of being proactive. And that's often what I, talk about with therapies now is trying to change that mindset, change that stigma that it's not the ER, it's the gym. Like go to get stronger,
Mm.
so that you can be prepared. Like for example, when I wanted to go to Patagonia, like I started training at the gym, months before I wanted to go. And so that's like, well, yeah, you don't just try to wing it in Patagonia and then hope there's an ER close by, right? And that's kind of what I feel like with relationships. Like go early, get prepped so that when you do find yourself in unfamiliar landscape, you've got some skills, you've got some tools. Don't just wait for the crisis to run to the ER.
We're going to be talking specifically about men in relationships today. I think there's always this perception that men get trapped in relationships or trapped in marriage. There's that age old expression, oh, the old ball and chain, when men are supposedly talking about their wives. But I find interesting is when you look at the stats around divorce rates, I think it's about 70% of the time it's women that initiate the divorce. And I think that this perception that we have that, men are forced to get into relationships and they'd much rather be on their own and doing what they want, I think is not always the case.
My specialty. So when I became a marriage and family therapist, I noticed that there was just so many more women in the field than there are men. And so there
Mm.
was just a lot of talk about women's issues and what women want. But I was thinking like, gosh, well, it takes two in a relationship. Who's talking about what the men want and what the men's issues are? So that really became my focus. I also wanted to work with veterans and first responders, which, there are women in those fields, but it's overwhelmingly male. And that was something that I actually did. I like, it really does stand out is that, men often are told a script that like marriage is supposed to be part of your future, and women get it too, but then women get the preparation for that, right? So if you think about, young girls versus young boys, the conversations with young boys are often about what are you going to do for work? What kind of career are you going to have? Whereas for girls, they definitely have, a little bit more emphasis on romance, a little bit more emphasis on relationships. Like, are you going to be a mom? Do you want to have a husband? Do you want to have kids? And the conversation has changed over the last couple of decades. But often what I see with men is this, yeah, I mean, it maybe does feel like they kind of ended up in a relationship that they didn't really plan for. It was just kind of part of the script that they were supposed to follow. And so that's also something that I'm really passionate about. It's like, hey, relationships are a choice. You don't have to enter one, because when you do, like, be intentional about it because it's hard work and it can impact your entire life. It will impact your entire life, right? So, like, treat it seriously, be intentional, and don't do it until you're ready. Don't just fall into it.
Your book, Strong, A Relationship Field Guide for Modern Men, I think really helps break down some of the common barriers that men face in relationships, especially around emotional expression, intimacy, and communication. And I think it does it in a really practical and easy to understand way, which I think is really effective. What inspired you to write a relationship book specifically for men in the first place? Because it's not something that you see a lot on bookshelves.
Actually, that's exactly why, right? Because as I was becoming a marriage therapist, I was, in my practicum, in my internship, and I was working with couples. And I realized that, if I wanted to give them homework or if I wanted to give them other resources, there was just so much more out there for the female partner than for the male partner, right? For the women, I'm like, oh, this podcast, this book, this, online resource, this women's group. And then for the guys, I'd be like, oh, let me just look. Like, what can I find? And so I felt like that was also a real disservice, right? Because here are these couples coming in equally motivated to improve their relationship, and there just wasn't the support there for the men. So I was like, well, I guess I'll write it. I guess I'll be the one to do it. But you bring up a good point because when I was bringing my book to bookstores, sometimes they didn't know where to put it, right? They're like,
Mm.
okay, there's no relationship help for men section. It's like the relationship self-help is like filled with books that are, again, not all, but overwhelmingly kind of tiered towards women. And the self-help books for men are all in the career and fitness category.
So I suppose there's this perception that men will maybe just go with it in terms of relationships and aren't maybe thinking about how they can show up better and be better in relationships. And that's something that women think about. But as you were saying there, when you see couples showing up, it's very much the men and the women that are invested in terms of trying to understand the relationship and ultimately improve it.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, the biggest shift that's happened, right? Because, like, you go back a couple of, decades, it really was like, talking about the socialization of boys versus girls, right? The girls are the ones that were getting the socialization of, hey, you're going to be a wife, you're going to be a mother, here are the relational skills that you need. And the guys, it was, you're going to be the provider, you're going to have to go out and form a career. What are the skills you need for that? And then you get like a match set, right? But that's not really the case with the modern couple. It's like the modern couple wants both people to be equally invested and have the connection be at the core of the relationship, not just, all right, pick whatever person is the opposite gender from you. And it's like musical chairs, just pick the best one you can get and that's it, build a life. And so that was something I was seeing, men that were very invested in, like, I want to be a good partner. Maybe I saw my parents, they didn't have a good relationship, or my dad wasn't a good role model for me. Where can I learn how to be a good husband? Where can I learn how to be a good father? Where can I learn to be emotionally available? It's just, gosh, I mean, it's really, we're kind of at the beginning of men really evolving into the new type of masculine that they want to be. And, I'm here for it. And I also want to make sure that there are resources out there for that as well.
I think what you were saying there really plays into this fundamental question that really the podcast is centered around, which is, what does it mean to be a man in today's society? As you were talking there about men being brought up to be the providers and the ones to go out to work. Obviously, the scripts have been very positively rewritten. It's not just a case of men going out and women staying at home. And so, as you were saying there, men are having to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a man in a modern day relationship? How does all that work? Like, all of these questions are playing into the broader question of what it means to be a man, but also these microcosms around things like relationships as well.
Absolutely. John Gray, I don't know if you recognize that name, but he talks a lot about the multi-option woman and the single option man, right? And that's what's happened, like you said, is, back in the day, it was like men had one option, they were providers, women had one option, they were, baby makers and homemakers. And now women are like, they can do anything, right? Women can have a career, have a family, be a stay-at-home parent, be a working parent, run for president, run for mayor, run for school board. Like, women have all of these options. And the message for men often is still kind of one track, right? Nope, your job is to be the financial provider, which is not fair, right? Because men, deserve the same options to have lives that reflect how they want to show up, right? If a guy wants to be a stay-at-home dad and really kind of take that responsibility, like, how can you say that that's not being a protector or a provider, right? It just looks different. Maybe it's not financial provision, but maybe it's providing the children with, a strong role model, right? Same thing with protection. He might not be out there, fighting wolves and lions, but he might be emotionally protecting his children from, the things that the world are, social media, right? So there's just ways that men can still inhabit their masculinity, being protectors, being providers, but let's give them more options. They're not just like narrowed into this, nope, you're a wallet, you're a fist, and you're a penis. That's it, right? It's like the objectification of women. Women fought against that for so long, right? We're more than just uteruses and, boobs and aprons. And so men deserve that same expansion as well.
When you're speaking with couples, what are some of the common challenges and issues that you see men having in relationships?
Often it's the communication. Men and women are socialized very differently when it comes to communication. And this is one of the tools I offer in my book, right? Is the 4 positions of conversation, right? Is like women, when they are socialized to speak to each other, they do a lot of listening and they do a lot of joining, a lot of empathy, right? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I imagine how that must feel. Men are generally socialized in when they speak to each other to offer solutions or offer a debate, right? An opposing opinion. And this is how men bond with each other. And so this is one of the most common things I see in heterosexual couples is like women are saying like, I just want him to listen. And he's like, why are you telling me a problem if you don't want me to fix it? Right? Or is it really that bad? Like I'm trying to change your mood, and it feels dismissive. It doesn't feel connected, right? So that's a huge one in relationships. And so that's also something to explain to both men and women is like the way your partner is doing it isn't wrong. It's just, once again, you need to build out the toolbox so you have the full set, right?
It's that issue as old as time, isn't it? Men coming in and trying to fix everything. I mean, I can relate to that in my own relationship. I find myself doing it without even realizing it, and then just thinking afterwards that was just not the right approach for that particular conversation. But I think what's really important is having, as you were saying, discussions around, well, what does good look like, and maybe why men are showing up in this way, and what the alternative could be. And in the book, you describe the strong model, which is really, I think, like a diagnostic, but also a developmental tool for men to show up in their relationships and improve, particularly things like communication skills. Can you walk us through exactly what that strong model is and what the acronym is around that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really wanted to have a blueprint because one of the big things I also noticed the difference between men and women is, sometimes women just wanted to talk about, their experiences and just be heard. And men were like, what's the plan? Like, I know we're not doing well. What's the plan? So that's where the strong model really came in, is like every healthy relationship starts with safety. So the S stands for safety. And I break safety down into 4 S's. So the first one is self-awareness, right? Again, if your relationship doesn't feel safe, why are you in it? Right? Because if you're not fully in it and you're not fully committed, then yeah, maybe the relationship doesn't quite feel safe to you or your partner. Right? Because there's a question of what are we doing here? So let's get that one out of the way. Let's start with self-awareness. What are you doing in your relationship? And what do you need to feel loved? And then the second one is kind of that really common, it's just stability, right? Recognizing that when life is stressful, when you don't have a shared plan, when you don't have core like agreements on how your life is going to look, finances, cleanliness, these are things that cause a lot of instability in couples, and couples just end up fighting a lot. So again, when it comes to safety and stability, starting with a shared plan. And then the last 2, which are the conflict and communication S's, it's self-regulation, right? This is something I often hear with men and women in relationships, is when they get into conflict, if a man cannot self-regulate, he can either come off as completely shut down, right? He's like stonewalled, or he can come off as really angry, which then makes his partner not feel safe, right? And so the self-regulation key is super important, right? How do you regulate your body when you're in conflict, when you and your partner are having a disagreement, or you're not doing well? How do you self-regulate so that you can come into conflict not either too big or shut down? And then the last one is self-expression. I talk about the emotion wheel, and this is, again, with men, just recognizing that your socialization maybe didn't give you kind of all the colors of the spectrum when it comes to emotional language. And this is just a skill. It's just learning new vocabulary, but it helps you express yourself better, right? And so safe self-expression. So that's safety. And once we get those down, like that's an absolute first step. And this is also where, in writing the book for men, explaining to men how women experience safety very differently. Because this is also something I've heard from men where they're like, why does she say she doesn't feel safe with me? That's so disrespectful. Like I've never put my hand on her. And it's like, yeah, but it's so much more than that, right? And that's the part that, again, let's just break it down a little bit more. T is trust. Obviously, every healthy relationship has to have trust. You have to be trustworthy. R is respect. Again, mutual respect in a relationship. And that's something for men. I've often heard that men, need respect to feel loved. And so really also talking about how you have to have safety, you have to have trust before respect comes naturally, right? If you try to force respect before there's safety and trust, again, you're going to be in for a bad time. So safety, trust, respect, these are kind of the survival skills of a relationship. Once you get there and you're like, all right, how do we thrive? Like maybe we're kind of hitting a stagnant point in our relationship where we're good, we're not fighting, but we want more. Then it's the ONG, which is openness, right? Continuing to give yourselves opportunities to discover new things, open communication. N is nurturing, right? Which again, I talk about a lot in the book, that especially if you are a father, you have a family, or even just, if you and your partner choose to be childless, but having the intention that we are going to nurture each other so we become the best versions of ourselves. And we are going to nurture our family in a way that we can be proud of the family that we create. And this is really that legacy building, right? It's not just, I'm going to nurture my bank account and make sure it's fat when I die. It's like, what? What is actually legacy, right? Nurturing your legacy is, about showing up present with your kids, right? With your partner. And then the G is generosity, which is, I like to just call it, it's like the fairy dust of the relationship, right? It's really, when you get safety, trust, respect, openness, nurturing, generosity is that, it's that little extra magic. It's that little extra something. And the way that it shows up is like kind of what John Gottman, marriage researcher extraordinaire, talks about basically having the magic ratio, right? So 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions. And he talks about in relationships that are super successful, they have a 20-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio. And he's like, those are the couples that they're just lovey, they're just flirty, they are like, doesn't matter what stage of life they're in, they have that goodwill buffer because they are so generous with, nurturing each other, looking out for each other, keeping little bits of connection alive. And that's really that generous perspective.
I think it's very telling that the first letter is S for safety, and there was 4 S's that came under that one letter. So I think it just emphasizes how important that element really is. I'd love to actually explore the self-regulation bit in a bit more detail, because as you were talking there, I was thinking about maybe some conflicts I've had with my partner in the past. And I do think actually that self-regulation piece is really important. Can you give us an idea of what good looks like in terms of self-regulation?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to talk about this, but one is that we all have a window of tolerance for distress, right? And there are things that can lower our window of tolerance or make it smaller. So if we're hungry, if we're angry, if we're lonely, if we're tired, right? The window gets smaller. If we've experienced any trauma, our window gets smaller, right? So I'm sure everybody can relate to this, right? If you've had a bad night of sleep, that day, your window of tolerance for anybody's, is going to get lower, right? Same thing if you're hungry, right? There's those ads. And so I think just being able to recognize like when your window of tolerance is getting smaller, what are some tips and things you can do to self-regulate so that you can open that window back up? And it might be, I just need to take a power nap. It might be, I recognize that today I just don't have the bandwidth to have that big meeting because I didn't get a good sleep last night. Or it might be, gosh, I need to eat a sandwich, before I go into the next thing. It might also be that, if you've already had a bad day, and then somebody cuts you off in traffic and that window just slams shut, right? Rather than going, all right, that was the last straw, going full rage mode, being able to recognize that with some self-regulation skills, so taking some deep breaths, slowing yourself down, maybe turning on some music, just really kind of getting yourself back to a place of calm. And recognizing that all of that is within your control, right? You don't have to do anything wild. You don't have to do anything completely like, oh, who has the time for that? I mean, you could do that in 30 seconds, right? Recognize. And again, it's the pause between the stimuli and the response, right? So rather than reacting immediately, right? Take that pause and say, all right, if I want to show up as the man that I want to be, What do I need? Right? And so there's box breathing, there's grounding exercises, again, even music, right? There's rhythm, turning on some music so you're like, all right, well, it doesn't bother me anymore, right? I'm good. Chill. And really anything that can get you back into your body. Because what happens, right, is that when we get into that fight or flight, when that window of tolerance slams shut, we're basically acting in survival mode, right? Our brain is like, you are under threat. That guy cut you off. You should definitely do something about that. And so just reminding yourself that, hold on, hold on, hold on. My survival is not at threat right now, right? I'm just in traffic and it's just stressful. But even though my body is activated, I am safe, I am okay, and I am in charge. Okay? And so that's some self-regulation stuff. Same thing when you're in a fight with your partner and you recognize, like, ooh, I'm getting outside of my window. The next sentence out of my mouth is either going to be really ugly or I'm going to need to take a break. And being able to, again, like in conjunction with your partner, because nobody likes it when, people are outside their window of tolerance. Also, just from a basic level, it's inefficient to fight outside of your window of tolerance because you're just like, the goal is to win. The goal is not to understand. The goal is not to solve. When your brain is in fight or flight and you're dysregulated, there's no critical thinking going on, right? I mean, that's literally what happens is like your prefrontal cortex goes offline and the brainstem shows up and says, all right, what do we need to do to win and survive this terrible fight that's happening? And so, again, self-regulation is so key in being able to say, hold on, hold on. What are the actual stakes here? What is even happening? Like, I don't need to go, DEFCON 5 on my partner because we're having a disagreement. Let me take myself down a notch, right? Like, this is not that serious. I love her. We love each other. We're just fighting about where to go for dinner. This is not that serious, right? So that's where self-regulation is so key in making sure that conflict doesn't spiral out of control.
Does it go against the age-old saying of never go to sleep on an argument? Because if you're getting to a point where it's like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night
Oh
and you
my
still haven't
gosh.
resolved it, but you feel like you have to force it through rather than go to sleep.
Well, kind of, because it's like you don't go to bed angry because you won't get good sleep, but definitely pause the argument and come back when you're more regulated. So that's the distinction. It's like you can pause an argument and be like, all right, we're both way outside of our window of tolerances. It's 11 o'clock. We both just need to go to sleep. But then what can you do to get back in your window of tolerance so that you don't go to bed just rage, right? So you might not get the solve you want. You might not finish the argument, but you can still not go to bed angry if you do some self-regulation skills.
Hi everyone, I want to take a moment to shout out Apex Everest, an incredible organisation and partner of the show who are pushing the limits of human resilience. Imagine this, climbing the equivalent of Mount Everest, but right here in the UK, by summiting the Helvellyn mountain 9 times in just 48 hours. But Apex isn't just about the challenge, it's the chance to be part of a year-round, vibrant community dedicated to unlocking your true potential. Whether you're looking to push your own limits or you're part of a team wanting to build an unshakable bond, this experience will stick with you for life. So if you're ready to conquer your Everest and be part of something special, check out apexeverest.com to find out more. How important do you see gender roles within relationships? We've had Kate Mangino on the show before, author of Equal Partners, who's very much an advocate of wherever possible sharing the labour and emotional loads of a relationship. Where do you sit with the idea of gender role?
I think we do need to have discussions around them because I think when we start to really break them down, some of these things are just basic adult life skills, right? And so I would be curious. I mean, sure, there are certain things that physically, for example, the female partner is the one that's going to carry the baby, and that might be the gender role that she has, right? But other than that, I think this is really where I want to, again, empower younger or just, people that are being aware of this, of like, we don't have to stay within these narrowly defined roles that came from a different generation, right? Is taking out the trash inherently a masculine activity? And if so, why? Right? Is hanging the laundry like inherently a feminine? Like, if so, why? And so again, just I don't think that like putting something in like, oh, that's masculine, oh, that's feminine, makes a lot of sense in the modern couple, right? Because there are some couples where they're like, well, neither of us like doing that. So then how can we figure out a way to outsource it? Like, I don't know, mowing the lawn. Like maybe we can get a lawn service, right? Or whatever. And so really just thinking outside the box of like, sure, there might be some physical, biological things that do have to be divided in a certain way, but most things, no, this is a modern world.
Yeah, and Kate was saying, which I agree with, that you're going to have tasks around the house. Let's say we were talking specifically around gender roles within the household. And she was saying that there will be tasks that one of you prefers to the other. And if that happens to be a traditionally masculine or traditionally feminine role, that's fine. But just maybe having a conversation around it rather than just, as you were saying there, just assuming that one person or the other is going to do it, I think is healthy. The other point that she made, which I really have thought on quite a bit since then actually, is I think a lot of the maybe traditional masculine roles can put, I think, a lot of pressure on men and maybe prevent them from being their true authentic self, particularly if they're feeling vulnerable, if they're feeling scared because they feel like they need to be the provider, the protector, and all of this kind of stuff. Kate's argument was if men start to embrace some of the other elements of it, like nurturing and being present with your kids, for example, then that can help men get their walls down a little bit and be a bit more emotionally vulnerable. And actually, she was saying from the research she did, a lot of the men were embracing this idea of more of an equal partnership, as much for them personally as it was for their partner, because they were getting so many benefits from it.
Absolutely. And that's really where I see the difference between maybe the traditional model of relationships versus the modern relationship is, in the past, it was really about function, right? What you could do, what you could do for each other. And now it's the core of most modern relationships is connection, is who we are to each other, right? And so really just having that freedom of like, I'm not with you because you can take out the trash. Like, if you like, let's talk about ways in which you want to show up in the house, right? And so really just prioritizing the connection and reminding each other that like, I'm not with you for what you do, I'm with you for who you are. I think that's the biggest difference between like some of the past need-based relationships to the more modern relationships where it's like, yeah, I could have chosen anyone in the world and we chose each other. So again, I think this is men want to have the freedom to be more expansive in their expressions. And again, having partners that can validate, like, yeah, I'm not with you for your role and what you do. I'm with you for who you are as a human. And that's what I like about you. And I want you to be as happy as I am, right? Again, throwing out the old, oh, it's happy wife, happy life. But, like the woman is fine to have her happiness at her husband's cost. Thankfully, I'm seeing a lot of that change. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't true in the past, right? There were women that were like, yeah, if my husband's suffering, I don't care as long as I get mine. That was not healthy, right? There are a lot of men that were very depressed and very shut down and just not taking care of themselves because they felt, like you said, that was their role. That was what they were supposed to do. Their suffering was the price of their wife's happiness, and that was the deal, right? And it's like, well, that's a terrible deal, right? At the end of the day, like, a loving relationship that's based on connection wants both people to be happy and fulfilled, right? And then having the skills to show up for each other in whatever way.
What are some of the common traits that you see within healthy and happy relationships?
Huge one is assuming the benefit of the doubt. So, like, we're all going to do things that land wrong on our partners, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, forget the thing that they asked us to do. But in healthy relationships, that's really the core, is going back to that safety, that self-awareness where they say, I know who you are, and I know that this was a mistake. I'm not assuming that you did it to hurt me. I'm assuming that you did it because you're human or because there was a misunderstanding, and let's figure it out. It's us against the problem. It's not me against you. And that's just the number one thing I would say for any healthy relationship, is that they assume the best of each other, not the worst.
Yeah, and as you were saying, it does come back to that element of safety. I feel like if you're in conflict or you're trying to resolve an issue, I've certainly felt in the past, and probably haven't realized it until I've reflected afterwards that I wasn't safe in myself. And so my partner was maybe attacking me when she wasn't, but because I didn't have that sense of safety and that sense of grounding, I guess that's when you go into defensive mode
Absolutely.
and you're not able to have those rational conversations, because it is about winning the argument because you're not feeling safe. And so I think ultimately you want to feel safe. Does that what it
Absolutely.
kind of comes down to, a lot of
Absolutely.
it?
And that's really where, I advocate for, even if you're not in a relationship, go to therapy, go figure yourself out because, we all carry stuff from our childhood. We all have, I call them like bruises, right? And that's often what happens, right? Is we have these bruises that we're not quite aware of, or maybe we spent, the rest of our lives like covering them up, tattooing over them, putting makeup on them, like, but then they get triggered when our partner bumps into them. Right. And so again, you might be like, oh, we have a great relationship. And then your partner one day says something like, oh, you forgot the blank. And then it hits that maybe that shame trigger of like, oh, she thinks I'm not good enough. She thinks I'm not smart. She thinks and then that's where all of that shame trigger and, all of that conflict can come up. But you're right. If you have that, ooh, okay, so what came up for me was shame, but I know that's not what she was trying to do. So I can divide between like what I heard her say versus what my internal critic told me she said, right?
Mm.
And that's a really important part of being a healthy person and a healthy relationship anyway, right?
If I'm a man and I'm thinking about what can I do that's really going to make my wife happy or happier in the relationship, and how can I show up better or improve on certain things, like what do you see as the key feedback that you get from maybe the women that you speak to about their relationships, about what men are doing well, but maybe also what they could do to improve that would really make a fundamental difference to the relationship?
Yeah, and this is good because one of the things, again, like going back to the socialization of men, is men often get a lot of messages around performance. So the very
Mm.
performance oriented, right? And so sometimes the message that I tell men is like, just stop working so hard, stop trying to perform, and just be present. That's what I hear from a lot of women. They're like, I appreciate how hard he works, but I just wish he would be present with me sometimes. Just hang out
Mm.
with me. Um, and that is really the thing that men often are like, I'm performing, I'm doing the things, I'm reading the books. I'm like, hey, take a break. Now just be, right? So presence is more important than performance.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot recently, both with my partner, but also my children as well. I'm fortunate that I'm there a lot of the time, but I want to make sure that I'm not just there, but present, because I think there's a big difference. And I've noticed that recently where I felt like I've been around them, but not present. And the difference when you can really think about that and be deliberate in terms of being there and being present, it just makes such a massive
Absolutely.
difference.
And it's often so simple, right? Because like I don't think we quite realize how much social media has like kidnapped our brains in that, people can be spending whole evenings together and they're not present with each other. They're on their phones, they're watching TV, they're on their phone and watching TV. They're not really present with each other. And so just that gift of like, hey, let's turn our phones off after 6 p.m. Let's really just go for a walk and just connect with each other. Just those little moments of presence are huge and make such a positive impact on a relationship. So yeah, and any relationship, like you said, with your kids, with your wife, just being present. I mean, it's like a dwindling, it's a scarce commodity in our very attention driven world. Right?
I want to talk a little bit about dating for a second. I'd be really curious from your perspective. What are some of the challenges that you see around modern day dating, and maybe particularly around online dating?
Ugh, online dating, it just reduced. I mean, again, it's like everything, right? Like the internet is great, it connects people, and then also, everything. And online dating is the same way. Like I met my husband on an app, right? But also apps can really reduce people to a very flat, like stats on a bio. If somebody's not photogenic, they're screwed. If somebody doesn't have the right stats, like they don't even get noticed. And so that is where it actually, I think, has enhanced the objectification of both men and women in a really negative way. Yeah, modern dating. On one side, there's like more avenues to meet people, and on the other side, it's really caused a lot of damage between people.
I learned recently on certain apps you've got a height filter, which I just think is crazy because the amount of people that you'll just be
Yeah.
reducing and not even getting a chance to see or get to know just from something as basic as height is obviously pretty scary.
Yeah.
Scott Galloway actually sums it up pretty well. He says that online dating prevents men from demonstrating excellence.
Absolutely.
Beyond being, aesthetically good looking and what's on your bio actually, being funny and being kind and being generous, because guys just aren't really meeting women in real life as much now. It's obviously a lot of it is online.
Well, that's actually where I recommend to, my single male clients specifically is go somewhere where you can show that stuff. So whether it's joining a running club, whether it's joining a supper club, whether it's joining a volunteer group where you can show your excellence. Like, you're an excellent member of society, you're a good runner, you're a good conversationalist, like putting yourself out there so that you can actually show up in other ways. But again, that's also where you're going to have to just work on being present with other people in other ways, because again, it's not a guarantee like it is on an app where you're like, okay, if somebody swipes on me, they absolutely want to date me, or they really want, they find me sexually attractive. And so it is a little bit more of a long game when you're, just putting yourself out there more, but it definitely will give you more of an opportunity to be seen as your full self.
I guess there's potentially a bit of a fear as well for men approaching women, because I think from what I hear, generally speaking, women still like the idea of being approached by a man. But equally, I think in men's heads, they're thinking, well, if the woman doesn't find me attractive, or if I do it in the wrong way, then I'm going to be a TikTok video and people are going to be slamming me for being creepy. So there's this paradox, I guess, between just doing it in the right way and maybe getting over that initial fear of approaching people.
And that's part of where I think just as a society, and maybe there's been so much emphasis on sexual dating and attraction. Like again, even for me coming to America from a different culture, I'm like, wow, it's like very obsessed about like finding a partner, getting sex, and all of that. And really, approaching somebody, it's a kind of a lost skill of just like having a conversation with somebody. You don't need to be overtly hitting on them, but just being able to find a point of connection. I wrote an article recently about like, is it creepy to hit on someone at the gym? And it's like, well, yeah, if you go up to them and you're like, I noticed your butt. Like, yeah, that's creepy. But let's say they have a water bottle with a sticker on it that you're like, hey, when, there's, Big Bend, or hey, that's some point of connection where it's like, you can just have a casual moment and lower the stakes a little bit. I think that's the thing, is like the stakes have gotten so high with all of this. It's like, we just need to like remember how to conversate. We just need to remember how to connect. We just need to remember how to approach people as people. Yeah.
I guess the other scenario in the gym as well is if you are approaching someone having just stared at them for the last 10 minutes. Like there's simple things that you can do where it becomes a lot less creepy and a lot more genuine, I suppose. But again, I think there's probably some education that is needed around this, right? Because guys aren't getting told like the best ways to approach women or the most appropriate ways to approach women. Yes, obviously there's common sense around some of it as well, but I think there are some subtleties that need to be spoken about as well.
And I do think that there needs to be education for the girls as well, right? Because again, like as we go younger, the girls are getting this message that like any guy that approaches you is a predator. And it's like, that's not true. And so that's also something as well. It's like, yes, there needs to be more education, but on both sides, right? It's like, how do you approach somebody respectfully without being creepy? And also, how do you stay open without making yourself vulnerable to like a negative threat, right?
In your experience, are women genuinely looking for guys who are emotionally open and vulnerable? And I ask that because that's certainly the common narrative at the moment. But then I've also heard a lot of conflicting stories and conflicting research that says actually when men are emotionally open and vulnerable, particularly about themselves, it can creep women out, or it can maybe in their eyes demasculate them. Like what are you seeing there? What are you seeing
So
around that?
there's a nuance here, right? Emotionally intelligent women and emotionally healthy women are looking for emotionally healthy and intelligent partners. Sometimes where I
Mm.
see, okay, there's always going to be men and women that they don't want that at all. They just want the hottest, the richest, whatever, right? So those people,
Mm.
no, they don't care about emotional intelligence. But then there's this like middle ground where let's say a woman is open to an emotional man, but what she gets is not an emotionally intelligent man. She gets a guy who wants to emotionally dump on her. And that's where the it comes in of like,
Mm.
why are you treating me like your free therapist? If you need therapy, go to therapy and then come back. Right. And so that's when then a man might say, like, oh, I tried to open up to her and she rejected me and she got the ick. And it's like, well, again, there's an appropriate level of like emotional intelligence where it leads to connection. And then there's emotional dumping that is not attractive, to anybody except maybe your therapist. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make because there are differences, right? Being emotionally open and vulnerable is not just one thing. There are different scales and there's obviously timing and all of that stuff as well. So it's not to say that it's completely yes or completely no. It's more complicated than that. And as you were saying there, I think emotional intelligence really is the key phrase there.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that men often get right in relationships that don't necessarily get highlighted a lot?
Oh gosh, I've seen so many men that are just sincerely adore their partners. They adore their partners. They love them. They care about them. They are loyal. They are committed. And often they're doing it without necessarily a good, healthy role model of what that looks like. And so
Mm.
I do want to validate that as well, is that, the younger men or the men of this new generation, or I guess any man that is willing to break the generational cycle, is showing up in a way that is so brand new, and that is so brave, and that is so courageous, right? It's like not necessarily having a model of healthy masculinity to look up to and still doing the work to show up in a way that you can be proud of in a relationship. And I've seen that in so many men, and I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, of how much work men are doing to show up differently, and how beautiful that is.
Crystal, what's one important thing relating to men and relationships that we haven't discussed today, but maybe should have done?
Um, I guess maybe one thing I just want to say is like, I always like to end with hope, right? Is have hope in yourself, and also recognize that a lot of these things, like, we're right at the beginning of talking about them. So, you haven't missed the bus, you're not too late. Just have some hope that, you can change and things can be different. And also, all of these things are skills you can learn, right? And so, like, if you look back at the person that you were 3 years ago, the person that you are today, I'm sure you see differences. And so just have hope, and just, have faith in yourself, and believe that you can do it as long as you want it. Hey, sky is the limit.
Crystal, thank you for your time today and thank you for the work that you're doing and thank you for shining a light on this because I do genuinely think that men want to show up better and be the best versions of themselves in relationships and are becoming more aware and more conscious of what that looks like, both for their partners and their children and everything that goes with it as well. I mean, I can certainly speak from personal experience myself. And it does maybe sometimes feel like that there isn't an idea of what good looks like and how to better show up and maybe some of the stuff that we're doing well that we don't even realize as well. So I think this work is super important. The book is fantastic. We'll include a link in the show notes for anyone to access it. It's a brilliant read, so I'd highly recommend that you check it out. But again, thank you so much for your time today, Crystal. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. Same here.